Hi, everyone. I'm Lorraine Driscoll, founder of Building Better Brains. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist, a functional neurology practitioner, and a brain integration therapist. Just to give you a background of how I got into what I do, I'm formerly a public school teacher. I taught grade 7 and 8 for well over a decade and was seeing a lot of things that were very concerning to me in terms of what was happening in the education system, how kids' needs were not being met, and so forth. And that is where early on in my teaching career, I decided to pursue additional studies in holistic nutrition. And then, of course, our children always change us. And, I think my daughter in some ways has taught me more than I've taught her. So she developed a autoimmune condition and had multiple diagnoses of OCD, SPD, ADHD, all kinds of other things and so forth. And it was from there that I started digging really deep into the things that the school system and even conventional medicine was limited in addressing. And that's what brought me into what I do today, where I bring all of this knowledge that I have and this training and so forth into Building Better Brains and the program that I created, the Full Potential Formula or the Full Potential Academy, depending which version of the program people do. So the first thing that I want to say is, the name of my program is the Full Potential Formula because it's about helping you reach your child's full potential. It's not about changing who your child is. So a lot of parents will tell me, I don't want my child to change because I do brain training. They think that somehow it's going to make them into a different person or they're going to lose the incredible abilities that make them because parents see that their child has these gifts as a result of some of the difficulties they have. And that's where I like to take children's struggles and turn them into superpowers. So this is not about changing your child. Brain training doesn't change people. It is about optimizing their abilities and optimizing their potential so that they can expand into the, highest version, if you will, of the person that they were meant to be, so to speak. So what I do is the first thing I do is I really am passionate about nutrition and the impact that that has on the brain. And that's where my first kind of awakening started happening in the school system is when I started recognizing how many of my students had major nutritional, I don't want to just say deficiencies because it's so much bigger than deficiencies, but major imbalances biochemically going on. And that has been such a game changer for my clients, previous students, my daughter, and so forth. So yes, we look into deficiencies. The big thing that I'm super passionate about, the more I dive into it and the more I learn, is toxicity. So many of our kids have higher toxic loads because of different genetic variations, sometimes exposures, and so forth. But that plays a huge role in optimizing brain chemistry and so forth. Other things like food sensitivities, gut health, all of that type of stuff are really important to address as well. And that's what I do. So the key is the first place I start is with nutrition and optimizing the brain's biochemistry because body chemistry is brain chemistry. So yes, we can make your child's brain chemistry optimal. And we do the nutrition first because what we want to do is we want to give the brain all of the raw materials, all of the things that the brain needs first before we get into what I call the brain building. So that whenever we start the brain building, the brain is now going to be receptive to the changes that we want to make. And so let me talk a little bit about brain building. So to keep it simple, brain building is really just number one, identifying what areas of your child's brain has weaknesses or weak connections, areas of underdevelopment, and so forth. And I want to be clear, all of us have, or most of us have these weak connections, to a certain degree. kids who have difficulties like dyslexia, learning disabilities, ADHD, ASD, and so forth tend to have a lot more. It tends to be more pronounced or more severe, if you will. So what I do, number one, is the advanced brain screening, where we screen to see where are the weak connections, where are the areas of underdevelopment, so that then we can work towards strengthening those weak connections with different neuro movements, stimulations, cognitive therapies, neurotechnologies, and so forth. So the first thing that I look at, number one, is primitive reflexes or primitive reflex integration. So primitive reflexes, to keep it really simple, are those reflexes your baby has in the first few, I'm going to say years, but sometimes it's just months or even weeks, that are there to keep them alive. Their purpose is to keep them alive in early infancy and to also assist with brain development and development of the nervous system. And so those reflexes should integrate, basically disappear into the nervous system in early infancy. And if they don't, then they basically create what I call kind of like brain blocks. It makes it harder for your child to access their cortex. And the way I kind of like to compare it is, you know, those pop-ups when we try to go to a website and check something out, and there's this pop-up in the way and you can't access the website because the pop-up is there and you have to try to figure out how to exit off. And some companies seem to make it more difficult to click it away. And I'm sure you've encountered this where you're like, I can't figure out how to make it go away. This is spam. And then you just go, you don't even bother trying to get into the website. You go back to Google and go to a different website for your search. So that is what reflexes can be like for a child who has these retained reflexes, is it can create these blocks where sometimes they're able to access their cortex and other times it's more difficult. So the amount of reflexes that are retained and how severely they retain there will determine a lot in terms of how impaired their abilities are going to be with cognition and processing speed and all of that type of stuff. And so what the research has found is that 100% of kids with diagnoses like learning disabilities and ADHD had retained primitive reflexes. And even within 12 weeks of integrating those reflexes, there were significant improvements to major improvements in these children's behavior, processing abilities, all of that type of stuff. So to me, I smile because that's super exciting. That means that there is so much potential. And that's what I found so frustrating as a teacher in the school system, where the answer was always IEPs and endless tutoring and medication, and all of those things have a place. I'm not opposed to those things, but there's so much more we can do. And it, to me, is so empowering for children that they don't have to be stuck with a diagnosis of dyslexia or a learning disability or ADHD. There's many challenges that they can overcome. So other things that I look at when we're looking at brain building is things like brain balancing, which is based off Dr. Malilo's approach, the founder of the Brain Balance Centers. I trained with him a few years ago. So that is just stimulating the weaker hemisphere. Once again, a lot of these kids have one hemisphere that's weaker and one that's overdeveloped. That's why they have these incredible zones of genius, but then can struggle intensely with everyday, tasks or processes and so forth. So once we strengthen that weaker hemisphere, they're not losing their gifts. Those pathways are there, but the things that they struggle with are not going to be so overwhelming and create limitations for them. So this is what I mean by we're helping kids to reach their full potential. We're not changing who they are. They're maintaining their gifts. We're just making the things that are so darn hard for them a lot easier. Other things we do in the program are things like cerebellum. So more of research has found that the timing mechanism is off in these kids' brains at the millisecond level. And when we improve that, things like speech, communication, language, learning ability, reading ability, writing, processing speed, focus, attention, behavior, all of that type of stuff, movement, in terms of gross and fine motor skills, can significantly improve to completely be, overcome. So I use technologies as well as neuromovements and cognitive therapies, all kinds of different things like listening therapies and interactive metronome and reading technologies that stimulate areas in the brain responsible for reading and so forth. So the big pillar of my program or approach, if you will, or almost our philosophy is number one, bioindividuality. So every child is different. So we don't have one approach for dyslexia or one approach or protocol for ADHD. We help kids where they are at, and we are looking at the bioindividual needs of that child. We're looking at their biochemistry. We can do functional lab testing, but we're also looking at what are the needs of the parent? Is mom super burnt out right now? What do we need to do to make this work for this particular family and this particular child? So that's number one. And then number two is right action at the right time. So a lot of clients I work with will tell me, we've done this or we've done that approach, which is maybe a portion or something we do in the program, and might not have got the result that they'd hoped for. And often the reason for that is because basically they're doing the wrong action at the right time, at the wrong time without realizing it. So for example, parents will come to me with a child who has visual processing disorder and has huge reading difficulties, and they went to vision therapy. But with visual processing disorder, we need to stimulate the sensory motor and ocular motor system by integrating the retained reflexes first, and probably work on stimulating a weak right brain, because that's where the visual cortex is, before we go into the vision therapy. And in fact, there's certain vision therapists that I work with that refer clients to me to work with them, with their patients first, and then they go back to the vision therapy if need be. So right action at the right time and bio-individuality is key. So basically our approach is multi-therapy. It's about addressing all of these root cause factors that really don't get addressed when kids are kind of going through just the conventional education system and so forth. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like, parents always ask me, why aren't teachers doing this? Why isn't this implemented in the school? And a big piece of the answer is, number one, funding, which we all know that's a huge factor, but also time and resources and training is just not there. The stuff that I apply in my program, unfortunately, was not stuff that I learned as a teacher in teacher training or as a teacher in professional development. But I was blown away that this is decades of research, peer-reviewed studies that support this, and we hadn't learned this. So this is my mission, to bring awareness to parents that a lot of these difficulties and challenges related to academics and focus and behavior can be overcome when we start digging into the root cause. So that being said, come February, I will have more information released about that. I will be doing advanced brain screenings locally, and I will be sending more information out to you about that, posting more information in the group and so forth. So stay tuned. I'll put a link with some more info of how you can get into contact with me and so forth. So thanks for watching, everyone, and reach out if you have any questions.